Hello. We're here with David Church, author of Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation, book one in a trilogy about Edison. So, David, my first question for you is, how did you come up with the idea for this book, for Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation?
Well, I didn't so much find the idea for Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation as it found me. I was home one day doing, three things at once, and the History Channel was playing in the background. And I overheard a narrator say that in addition to his more famous inventions like the phonograph and the incandescent light, Edison tried to create a machine that would communicate with the dead. And this hit me in the back of the head like a bag of quarters. And I immediately thought it had the makings for one hell of a story. To make sure I hadn't imagined it, I contacted the Edison estate in Fort Myers, Florida, and spoke with a docent who confirmed that yes, Edison had attempted for years to perfect just such a machine.
For years, he was busy inventing the electric light and motion pictures. How did he find time to invent this?
Edison was the original multitasker. He juggled dozens of potential inventions at a time. And then, as one or more approached a level of feasibility, honed in on them relentlessly, often toiling day and night with his only respite being catnaps on a cot and a diet of milk and apple pie. Milk and apple pie. I love discovering details like this. They're minor but potent, and it just goes to show you that even a genius needs comfort food.
So this resurrector machine that is the basis of your novel, did Edison actually create a metaphysical highway to the afterlife?
Frankly, no one knows. What he did construct was a spirit box that theoretically could penetrate the boundary between life and death by manipulating sound waves. Now, the traveling machine in the novel, the resurrector, and the Purgatory Equation of speed plus sound plus shock equals ID trans, those are my own inventions, as are the characters of John Dawkins, his stalwart young assistant, who is the action hero of the story, and Emily Alburn, the Ziegfeld Folly showgirl, who becomes his love interest. And for fictional characters, they make for a terrific couple.
A little fact, some fiction, some speculation. How do you categorize Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation as a book?
It's historical fiction and science fiction, kind of a mashup of genres with elements of adventure, fantasy, and even musical comedy thrown into the mix. But the backstory is factual, and every real person in the novel, from Mark Twain to the teenage George Gershwin to General Jack Black Pershing, is accurate in the portrayal of who they were, the geography of where they were, and the chronology of when it all took place. Now, what I do with them is my prerogative as a writer, although their behavior remains true to their nature. For better or worse, character is destiny. George Gershwin really was a rehearsal pianist for the Ziegfeld Follies. The Russian psychic, Madame Blavatsky, really was one of Edison's advisors. And Edison really did vanish for an entire month in February of 1918, just as the United States was on the precipice of entering World War I.
So Thomas Edison, the real Thomas Edison, somewhat mysteriously disappeared for the entire month of February 1918.
Right.
Where did he go?
Well, for the purposes of the novel, he goes to purgatory. But the truth is far less metaphysical. But to this day, the details remain mysterious. Edison had joined forces with the United States government and proposed over 40 new combat inventions that had one thing in common. They would facilitate, they would incapacitate, but they would not kill. As a consequence, all of his inventions were turned down by the War Department, every single one. Now, Edison was devastated, and his wife, Mina, who sensed the onset of what she called a depression, took him away to a private villa in Key West for a rest cure. But why Key West? The Edisons had their own sumptuous estate only 300 miles away in Fort Myers. And why for an entire month? And why such secrecy? As I said, very mysterious, and a ripe opportunity for any writer supplied with an arsenal of what ifs.
So David, as you've explained to us, the fictional Thomas Edison of your novel is rooted in the facts of the real Thomas Edison's life. You had to learn a lot about the real Thomas Edison. What sources did you use to research the famous inventor?
You know, there are many fine books on Edison, but the one that stood out for me during my research is A Streak of Luck, The Life and Legend of Thomas Alva Edison. It is a beautifully written biography by Robert E. Conant, and also more recently, Edison by Edmund Morris, which is both superbly written and incredibly well documented. I should add that the various Edison museums across the country, especially the ones in Fort Myers in Florida and West Orange, New Jersey, are wonderful places to get a real sense of Edison the man.
In the book, David, Edison advises that a trip to purgatory should only last for 90 seconds. Why that number? What's the significance of that?
Edison's rule of 90 seconds in purgatory, no more, no less, is really an arbitrary time limit I chose for dramatic purposes. But, you know, after all, life and death reside on totally separate planes of existence. If you're alive, it's probably not a good idea to spend too much time in the afterlife, as one character finds out to their everlasting regret.
David, the plot twist at the end of Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation seems to suggest a sequel. Are there plans for one?
Well, the address of this website is edisontrilogy.com. So, you know, if you've made it this far, you probably know that Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation is book 1 in the Edison Trilogy. So yes, there will be a sequel. There will be 2, in fact, and they are now complete. In fact, the second book, Thomas Edison and the Lazarus Vessel, will be released in November of 2022. It veers further into fantasy than book 1, but again, the backstory is based on factual events. For example, did you know that President Franklin Roosevelt had to fight off a corporate coup during his first year in office? Now, I'll save the specifics for later, but they are both timely and terrifying. The history we were never taught is astonishing, and it really almost happened.
So back to the central character of your books, Thomas Edison and the Purgatory Equation and the upcoming additions to the trilogy. What were Edison's most memorable qualities?
The most memorable thing about Edison to me is his wisdom. I'm not talking about his genius, but his common sense, which is as civil as it is knowing. You know, Edison once said, what a man's mind can create, a man's character should control. That's a moral guidepost that many of today's celebrated innovators would do well to remember. But perhaps the motto that hit home most for me is this: vision without execution is hallucination. Well, those are wise words for anyone willing to undertake the daunting, rewarding, incredible adventure of putting pen to paper and creating something out of nothing.